Critically acclaimed author Lawrence Hill came to speak at Savannah State University, addressing faculty, staff, and student body about his novel, The Book of Negroes, and its many name changes. Tigers Roar editor-in-chief Deorlena Natera sat down with Hill and talked about his career, current writings, and his thoughts and opinions on current hot topics. Without further ado, here is TRTV's A Talk with Lawrence Hill.
Hello, I'm Deorlena Natera for Tigers Roar TV, and we're here with esteemed author Lawrence Hill. He's the author of 9 books, including The Book of Negroes, the winner of various awards, including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize, and both the English and French-Canadian versions of CBC Radio's Canada Reads. He traveled across Canada to deliver the 2013 Massey Lectures based on his new nonfiction book, Blood, The Stuff of Life. He is finishing a new novel and has co-written the adaptation for a 6-part television miniseries of The Book of Negroes. The miniseries was filmed in South Africa and Nova Scotia and will air in 2015 on CBC in Canada and on BET in the United States. He volunteers with Crossroads International, book clubs for inmates, and with the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. He lives in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. This is Mr. Lawrence Hill. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm happy to, dear Lena.
How are you today?
Just great, thank you. First visit to Savannah State University. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you. It is my understanding that you have visited Savannah previously, though.
I have. I came here when I was researching the Book of Negroes, or Someone Knows My Name, as it's known for the time being in the States. And yes, it's a gorgeous, fascinating city.
Where exactly did you visit in the area?
Well, I spent a lot of time walking around the city, going through bookstores, picking up histories, especially African American histories in Georgia and Savannah, so in the downtown area.
What parts did you gather from Savannah that you were able to use in your book?
As it turns out, nothing, because at the time that I was researching, I thought that I might set some of it in Georgia, but I finally decided to set the early part of the novel in St. Helena Island, one of the sea islands off the coast of South Carolina. So not too far away, because it's the very southern tip of South Carolina. But I finally decided that the part that I would set down here would be in South Carolina and not Savannah. So I didn't end up using that research. However, I have a novel on the go just now that I've just begun, and some of that will take place on Cumberland Island, which is an island off the coast of the Georgia coast. And so I'll be back for more research.
So a lot of close ties to Savannah.
Mm-hmm. Were
you able to use some of the Gullah Geechee history in your novel?
Very much so. In the novel, the character comes as a young girl. Her first experience in the Americas is to come work on an indigo plantation in St. Helena Island, which is one of the sea islands. It's not far from Hilton Head Island. So I really dug into that a lot, and I went off into that part of the world too when I was researching the book. It was great fun, fascinating. I learned a great deal.
Great deal, awesome. So can you describe your writing process to us?
Well, sure. My writing process is, my first work as a writer was to be a journalist. I wrote for newspapers in Canada as a daily newspaper reporter. So I learned to write fast. And the novels I've written generally are pretty long and complex, so I'd never write them if I was going too slowly. So I tend to be a bit explosive on the page to begin. I just try to look for some sort of volcanic eruption and just let the energy spill onto the page, and then come back and I rewrite a great deal. So I write sort of fast and loose and explosively on first draft, and then I rewrite.
You spoke in the lecture that you just came from. You said that you spent some time in Spain where you strictly wrote. How was that? It reminded me of like the Eat, Pray, Love, finding
Mm-hmm.
yourself. How was that experience in Spain, and how did that affect your writing process?
It was totally liberating, actually, and I will forever love Spain because it became a place where I became a writer. And my feeling is, you're not a writer if you won a prize, or if you've become famous, or if you've sold 1 million books. What makes you a writer is if you're writing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one of the most famous writers of the 20th century was Franz Kafka, the author of Metamorphosis, and he died before any of his works were known in the public, but now he's one of the most famous writers ever produced by the 20th century. So was he not a writer because he wasn't published when he was alive? Of course he was a writer, he just wasn't published. So what defines you, I think, as a writer is that you were writing. And the thing that I love so much about Spain is that, well, apart from the language and just the culture, is that it gave me a place to really find myself as a writer. So I quit my job as a newspaper reporter and lived off my savings and just wrote every day around the clock. And so I found myself as a writer in Spain and began to really tap into those creative, energies. So I love the country, but one of the reasons that it led me to the heart of who I really need to be creatively, an artist.
Where did your inspiration for the Book of Negroes come from?
Well, I read a long time before writing it that this unbelievable migration of blacks from New York City to Nova Scotia at the end of the American Revolution, having had their names inscribed into this British naval ledger called the Book of Negroes, and then how 10 years later they turned around and left Nova Scotia, Canada, on the east coast of Canada and sailed across the Atlantic to found the colony of Freetown in Sierra Leone. So the inspiration was sort of hitting upon these two unbelievably striking journeys. And how is it that here we are in 2014 and most North Americans still don't know anything about these histories? And I find it fascinating that there are still huge untold or unknown or underappreciated stories about our own history. So in a way I was kind of lucky that it's not well known, because it gave me room to come up the middle with a novel and then a television miniseries, and I hope it's still running. And so yeah, it's amazing to think that we have all these histories that we still don't know, and that still leave us room to dramatize and to excite people about things they are happy to learn about that they'd never heard of before.
I completely can relate to that. Being at an HBCU, a lot of times it will be the first time that a lot of us are having these discussions in our classrooms of our history, and it's really, frightening to me that, my peers were also blind to a lot of the history a lot of it's in our face and we just don't know to recognize what we're looking at. But I really enjoyed that aspect of your novel. How your novels are so in depth, like how long do you research to actually, before you get to the writing process, or do you do that during the writing process? How does that work?
Well, because I'm fundamentally lazy, I'm afraid that if I just research, I'll never get any work done, and it's a great pretext to do no work. And so I force myself to start writing as soon as a book begins, and not to say, oh, I'll just research for a year in a library and then I'll start to write. So I make myself start writing from day one and research simultaneously. So the writing comes, and that's because often the better ideas that I come up with, they're not sort of planted, or they don't sort of present themselves to me when I'm sitting, scratching my chin around the table, wondering what will I do with this story. They come while I'm writing. They actually are born as a process as a kind of a byproduct of the writing process. So I just get writing to sort of help me discover what my story will be. So it's messy and sloppy, and sometimes I have no idea where I'm going, but it's a writing that leads me to the answers on a second or a third or a fourth draft. So I research and write simultaneously, and this book, The Book of Negroes, took 5 years. So that includes researching and writing time and editing and all that.
Your parents are immigrants who immigrated to Canada in the 1953. Your dad is black and your mom is white. They both worked in the human rights movement. How did your parents' ideas and examples influence your work? How do they?
Well, totally, profoundly. Maybe not specifically the Book of Negroes or the specific books I've written, but I've been inspired by everything they represented and stood for and did. I say sort of jokingly that there are two types of people in the world: a type who completely throws off the values of their parents and forges an entirely new direction because they reject, in a way, many of their parents' values and create their own, and that's perfectly legitimate, sometimes entirely necessary. And other people who really embrace their parents' values, and I'm in the latter category. I've embraced my parents' values and their vision, their social drive, their desire to make a better world. I didn't take on the work that they did. I didn't spend my life as a sociologist or as a human rights activist. I'm a writer, but I've certainly embraced their values on the page and in my own living from day to day.
How do you teach your children about the black experience, being biracial? How do you approach that when it comes to your children?
Funny, that's an interesting word, biracial, and I've never really used it that much to think of myself. I've just sort of when I've had to think about it, you know how it is. When you're brushing your teeth in the morning, you're not thinking about your racial identity. You have to think about it when somebody brings it to your attention and makes it an issue. But now I'm sorry, I've forgotten the actual question underlying that business about biraciality.
I was asking, how do you teach your children?
Oh, right, how do I teach my children about black identity and perhaps about black culture, black history? Well, I teach it by embracing it in my own life, in my work, and in two of my volunteer gigs that I've been involved with for many years. Well, one I've been involved with for 35 years as a volunteer with this group that does work with women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa. So they see me do this work as a writer and as a community volunteer. We talk, all the kitchen table talk, but just naturally about different aspects of black history and black culture. So part of it is just easy talk, father to child, and part of it is through example. And part of it is through introducing them to worlds where they can connect in their own way with African culture. And my eldest daughter, who's 24, who finished university a couple years ago, she's just come back from working for 2 years in Ghana as a volunteer and came home declaring that she's going to spend her life in Africa, and she's not done with it, and it's not done with her. So far the job's going pretty well, because she's certainly embracing profoundly everything that's African about her background.
How do you feel about people who are against labels such as African American? Raymond Simone recently sat down with Oprah, and she declared that she did not want to be labeled as African American. She just wanted to be American.
Well, I mean, James Baldwin said the same thing. James Baldwin hated being identified as an African American writer, and clearly he was profoundly African American in his writing, in his meditations, in his essays, in his novels. James Baldwin was a fiery, dramatist and essayist about things African American. But he didn't like to be called an African American novelist because he felt it diminished him. He just wanted to be called an American novelist. One of his contemporaries and rivals was Norman Mailer, who got to be called an American novelist. So Baldwin felt that being called an African American novelist made him sort of a second-class American novelist. He just wanted to be an American novelist who wrote about African themes. I think that every individual should have the right to decide how they want to identify themselves, and I don't think it's my business if you or my daughter or our friend or a student here or there chooses. Why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't people in this day and age choose to sort of fashion an identity that works for them? And indeed, even in the same family, when I researched that book, Blackberry Sweet Juice, on being black and white in Canada, sometimes what I did was I interviewed 34 other Canadians who, like me, had one black and one white parent. Sometimes I'd interview siblings, and those siblings wouldn't all see matters of race and self-identity the same way. And why should they? Why should every sibling in the family, same socioeconomic background, same education, why should they see themselves the same way? It's a good thing that they don't. And so I don't want to impose my way of thinking on other people because I'm right and they're wrong. But for me, I think that it would be kind of unrealistic to pretend that I don't care about those terms, or to pretend that they have no weight. The fact is that out there in the world, they have weight every day, and you'll encounter it every day, or you could encounter it every day, depending on how you live. And so you can say as much as you want that these terms don't have any meaning and you won't use them, but they will crop up and affect people in a very practical, real way, sometimes a very negative way, throughout their experiences in school and in the workforce, socially. So I don't think you can get away from the reality, even if we'd like to change that reality.
Find your dreams come true, and I wonder if you know what it means to find your dreams, and I wonder.
And I'm back on my grind. A psychic read my lifeline, told me in my lifetime my name will help light up the Chicago skyline, and that's why I'm 7 o'clock, that's prime time. Having to watch God calling from the hotlines. Why he keep giving me hotlines? I'm a star, how could I not shine?
I wonder if you know what it means, what it means.
So we were speaking about Raven Simone and Oprah, but speaking of Oprah, the Book of Negroes was selected by the Oprah magazine as the 2010 top summer read, and you just came from. Do you mind sharing with us?
I just came from Cannes, a film festival in southern France on the Mediterranean. It's the festival is called MIPCOM, and it's a festival of television shows that will be airing, sometime soon. So it's a big trade fair, and so the Book of Negroes premiered a couple of days ago in Cannes. So it's the first time it was shown on the big screen with people in the audience, and it was great. It was a lot of fun. And since I co-wrote it, it was particularly thrilling to see this kind of come to life on the screen.
That's awesome. Your novel, The Book of Negroes, was published under several different names. Can we talk about how the American audience and how the publishers didn't feel?
Sure. Well, the book is published primarily around the English-speaking world as the Book of Negroes, which is the name of this ledger that documents the exodus of 3,000 African Americans to Nova Scotia in 1783. This ledger was kept by the British Navy, who are documenting all the people who are leaving New York for Nova Scotia, Canada. So it's a real document. You find it in the New York City Public Library, and at Colonial Williamsburg, and in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives. In the originals in the National Archives of the United Kingdom in London. So the book is called The Book of Negroes because it was central to the story of Aminata, the main character. But the American publisher at the last minute felt that they couldn't bring out this book 7 years ago with the word Negroes in the title. Bookstores wouldn't order it, pre-order it with the word Negroes. They felt that it might offend an African American readership. And so it sort of entered the world with two different titles, one for the States and one for most of the rest of the English-speaking world. And when I've toured in the States, all over, whether it's Atlanta or Beaufort, South Carolina, or Brooklyn, Chicago, Boston, often African Americans have come up to me and have said, it's a good thing you changed that title, because down here I wouldn't have bought that book if it had been called The Book of Negroes, because that really bothers me, that title. And it's given me a chance to tell people about the title, the Canadian title, and where it came from, and then I'm trying to kind of resurrect a forgotten document and bring it to public attention, respectfully, not provocatively. We'll see how it goes. When BET releases a miniseries, the publisher will re-release under the original title, so we'll see how the American market responds. But one thing's for sure, it'll provoke conversation and discussion, and that's a good thing.
In your other novel, Blood, The Stuff of Life, talks about blood, a subject that a lot of people, doesn't usually make table conversation.
No, but it should. Why not? Now, Blood, the Stuff of Life isn't a novel. It's an essay. It's a nonfiction book. But it's a book about the various ways that we see blood in ourselves. In what way does our self-concept as a woman, as a man, as a person of a certain racial background, of a certain religious background, of a national background, in what way does blood feed into our sense of identity? And I think it feeds in profoundly, but it's something we don't discuss too much, but it's central to how we see ourselves. And also blood, men and women traditionally have very different notions of their own blood. I mean, for men, traditionally, for the millennia, blood was something to be spilled as a trophy of sport or war. It was a sign of one's glory on the battlefield or in sport. And for women, it was a monthly sign of their fertility. Blood is very different often, and has been treated very differently over thousands of years among the two sexes. And so I think that's fascinating too. So there's much to say about blood and identity, and so I went there in this set of essays that I wrote last year.
And you touch on the two instances that really sparked your fascination with blood in your novel. Can you share with us those two?
Are you talking about the childhood incident?
Yeah.
Well, in one case, I was a young boy. I was, 6 or 7, and I was playing hide and seek on a schoolyard, and I accidentally cut my wrist very badly. My wrist came down on an open piece of glass from a broken beer bottle that I hadn't seen, and so my wrist was lacerated, and I was bleeding profusely. It was not your regular childhood cut, where you slap a Band-Aid on and you're fine. So I knew something was really wrong. So I ran home screaming, of course, and even in my state of anxiety and worry and hollering for my mother, I made sure that my blood splashed on every single sidewalk panel as I ran up the street to my house. And you know how those sidewalk panels are about 1 or 2 yards long? I wanted an unbroken stream of blood on every panel right up to my front door. Well, why would a 7-year-old boy do that? I mean, for me, that's fascinating. Like, I knew somewhere deep inside myself, even in my state of shock and panic and fear, that blood was sacred to me, and the stuff of my own life was spilling out on the sidewalk. This was my life spilling out on the sidewalk, and somehow I thought that was sacred, so I wanted to mark the sidewalk with my sacred fluid. And so the anecdote is revealing to me because it taught me, as I reflected back, just how profoundly blood enters into the psyche of a person as a kind of a metaphor for our own life. More than any other bodily part or bodily fluid, blood is really defines our imagination about ourselves.
I agree. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. And again, the mini-series, The Book of Negroes, will be airing on BET. Do you have a date for that yet?
2015, early 2015.
Early 15. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed that.